When we look in the brain, those decisions are being made and shaped by subconscious processes that we're unaware of.
So what's happening with bias regret?
Well, it's been designed like a slot machine. They're becoming much more short-term. Every time somebody likes your photo, that comes at a cost.
Professor Gemma Calvert is a neuroscientist and behavioral strategist who has spent over 25 years helping brands and organizations understand the hidden forces behind human behavior.
Her work reveals what people truly think, feel and want beyond what they truly say.
Big tech companies should be held accountable so that we don't mess up our cognitive systems.
When we look at online platforms, how do these triggers draw us in?
Well, dangerous marketing.
Welcome to Open House, Professor Calvert. You were one of the earliest pioneers to bring neuroscience into the world of marketing. Now, what did you discover?
Well, I worked in marketing for about 4 years, and when we started to be able to see inside the human brain whilst people were doing all sorts of tasks, for example, making decisions, having feelings about different types of objects, I realized there was an opportunity to use these technologies to better understand what consumers really wanted. And the reason being is that if you've ever sat in a focus group, you'll see it's often led by one or two very vocal individuals, and everybody goes along with them when you're asking people for their opinion. Do you think this new product or prototype is going to fly? And you get a very positive response. And yet we know that 80 to 90% of the new products that are launched into the global marketplace each year fail within their first year to market. There seemed to be a gap between what people were saying and what they were doing.
Could you give us an example of that gap?
There was a very interesting study where we saw that 6 seconds before you are conscious of making a decision, we were able to see what that decision is going to be. And what we found is that the emotional parts of the brain, which are largely inaccessible through introspection, become active first in that choice-making scenario. And yet, when we talk about making choices, it's very much, a conscious thing. But when we look in the brain, those decisions are being made and shaped by subconscious processes that we're unaware of. Our subconscious brain takes on board about 11 million bytes of information per second compared to 50 bytes for our conscious brain. It only lets a tiny bit of information that's relevant for us just here, just now, to filter through to our consciousness. We are conscious of the mood we're in and we want to do something, or we're aware of the benefits of a particular product. But there was a very interesting experiment conducted many years ago. Researchers were showing individuals pairs of faces on each trial, and all they had to do was just point to the one that they said was more attractive. The experimenters then put the two cards down, two photographs down on the table, and would hand them back the card that they chose and ask them to describe why. But they had a little trick up their sleeve. On many trials, they actually handed them back the photograph they rejected, and people would still explain, completely unaware that they were doing this, exactly why they chose that face. But they didn't. That was the face that they rejected. So in certain circumstances, this is a really important experiment because people couldn't really believe that this would happen. And they tried every combination. 80% of the time, people don't realize that the switch has been made, and they continue to confabulate. The brain wants to justify why we have chosen the thing that we have.
And that brings me to the next question, Professor Calvert. Bias regret. So we buy the product, and then soon after we are trying to justify why we bought the product. So what's happening with bias regret?
Well, I think there's two sides to purchasing. We see in the brain, if you go into the store, there's the anticipation, which is dopamine being released of what you're going to get, and you can imagine yourself owning this particular handbag, for example. And when you pick it up, you're 50% of the way to buying it. The store is maybe exclusive. It's got lovely lighting. It's got some fantastic music. You're transposed into this new world. And then when you pay the money, that's all fine. But when you leave the store, and perhaps when you get home, that contextual information has all gone. And now we feel the loss. The brain is always weighing up a comparison of the benefit versus the downside. If that negative response outweighs the reward that you perceived when you bought it, then you're going to feel regret.
But in today's world, Professor Calvert, a lot of the research is done before we even walk into the store, or a lot of items are actually bought online now.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work in terms of how our brain processes it? Because we can't touch it. Why do we still buy into online retailers?
I think it's less about the physical touch and more about the expectation or imagination of yourself owning that. And online stores know this because they give you an opportunity to put things in a cart. So I'm picking out the size, I'm picking out the color, I'm investing my time and resources on this particular item. And it's kind of similar to sort of holding it. There are a lot of tricks that online shopping platforms manifest to evoke that endowment.
But we anticipate, we like the feeling of knowing the product is coming rather than the excitement of having the product. So what's that?
So it turns out that dopamine, it's now understood to really underpin anticipation more than the reward itself. Similar to a slot machine, a near miss activates more dopamine than a win. And brands, they deliberately delay that satisfaction so that you have to wait longer the more the anticipation builds.
Speaking of luxury retailers, they sort of operate a bit differently from your normal retailers, right?
Yeah.
So they're very cold. The sales associates are not going to come running to you and say, how can I help you? I would say it's cold, very clinical in a sense, but yet people are drawn to it. So Professor Calvert, what is happening there?
I think that's there's some individual differences there because if I go into a Louis Patek or whatever, I expect service.
Yes.
That said, one of the ways that they, I suppose, entice you in is to emphasize the scarcity. And scarcity has always equated with value. This is why sometimes you'll see long queues that people tolerate outside luxury shops. You can't have it now, you'll have to wait. So I guess humans have always been competitive in that respect. You need to have things which...
status.
Yes, status symbols, which are rare.
So, recently, Professor Calvert, you may have seen in the news, everyone was clamoring for the Swatch AP, but Swatch came out to say that you're still able to get it in the months to come. But people were still queuing up and, kind of fighting over. So what was happening there?
So I think that they knew full well what was going to happen. They let it happen and then issued a statement saying, it wasn't us. You can get it anytime. Right. But by then, the meme has already hit. So, I think...
great marketing.
Well, dangerous marketing.
Yeah. So, Professor Calvert, so I'm sure you're very familiar with this, right? So boba and kiki, and when people look at this, can you explain what this actually means?
90% of people will say, this is boba and this is kiki. And so the question is, why? Right? Would you like to hazard a guess?
Okay, sure. I think maybe boba sounds a bit more rounded and kiki sounds a bit sharper. Like boba is like B-O-U-B-A. It feels a bit more rounded.
Right. So you see that not only the mouth saying booba is rounded, but when you write it down, the B's and the O's
are rounded.
And
whereas
kiki, see the shape of the mouth going kiki. It's much more horizontal and sharp. And kiki, when you write it, is kik-ka, kik-ka.
Yes. Sharp and long.
Yeah. So we have this kind of cross-modal correspondence between different senses. And some of it may be hardwired.
Right. And could you give us some examples, like in terms of how we gravitate towards certain brands?
One of the ones that we use quite often is Haagen-Dazs.
Oh, the ice cream.
Yes. Yeah. Now, sometimes those brand names are made up, like Haagen-Dazs. It doesn't mean anything. But the phonetic sound of Haagen-Dazs is quite rare in Western languages. And guess what? That rarity is implicitly picked up and perceived as scarcity. So by using rare phonetic features, they can connote premiumness or luxuriness.
And another brand that I would like to ask about is McDonald's. Every kid knows it, every kid wants it. But why do we I think most people might, I could be wrong, but most people might prefer McDonald's to, say, another burger brand. What have they done?
There's a lot of factors going
The
on here,
food,
right?
yes,
I
I
did
do.
have to check this, but I think they might have had first mover advantage, particularly cross-culturally out of America. They've marketed themselves as not just fast food, but as a family, fun, friendly restaurant. And as such, I think they build a very strong relationship with consumers, building a community by offering desirable products. They're tasty, it's perceived as a sort of treat in many cases.
What about the golden arches and the colors that they've used and the way they've designed their stores?
Well, yellow we associate naturally with things which are sunny, and red seems to have a differential effect on the brain. So red is one of the earliest colors that man has, and its earliest name for it is almost similar to the word for blood. So it's like if you look at many of the logos for fast food chains, they tend to be red. It's like a sly seduction for your brain because it has a sense of urgency
to it.
Yes, and stimulates appetite.
So it's not danger.
This now leads into associations and semiotics rather than the neuroscience per se.
Right.
It's rather interesting that purveyors of carbonated drinks use spiky images like stars or triangles, right, on their packaging to connote the sharpness of carbonation. Literally, your brain builds up expectations, and when you see certain shapes or colors, your brain builds an expectation of what it's about to receive. And that in itself colors the actual experience of the consumption.
Professor Calvert, we spoke a little bit about sensory marketing. So could you explain a little bit more about how do scent, sound, lighting, touch, and space all work together, to create that sensory experience for us?
We'll start with the very obvious one, which is the adage that we eat with our eyes. And what we see overrides what we think we're tasting or smelling often at the very basic level. We've seen this, of course, with Pepsi and Coke, and I'm sure you've come across this multiple times when blind tests, Pepsi wins out on the taste side. As soon as we can see the brands, Coca-Cola is the preferred soft drink.
Yeah.
But there have been brain imaging studies of this to show that this is not a placebo effect. So when we literally taste, you shut your eyes and you taste flavors, we can discriminate many, many flavors and fragrances, literally thousands. This is done by the taste cortex. This is parts of the brain that literally sense the taste or sense the smell. Now, when you have your eyes open, what you see starts to change the responses of those brain cells in those areas. So you are literally experiencing it differently. And a lot of packaging does the same thing with perfumes. The actual product itself it costs very little for the liquid inside. What you're paying for often is the packaging. That's expensive. When you pick it up and you see it, that will influence the way you perceive the scent itself.
But people still do pay for the bigger brands, though, even though the packaging may not be as fancy.
I think they connote different things. But it's not just what you see. So, for example, if you're buying an expensive watch, you better make sure that the box that it comes in closes with a tock, tock, not clack, clack. Is it clack? It's like cheap, right?
Right.
So somehow we've learned that low frequency, heavy sounds are synonymous with expensive things. And clack, clack, high frequency is more frivolous.
How about cars, Professor Calvert?
There's a lot of research that goes into the development of cars, both visually. So sometimes, for example, it's got headlights and then it's got a grille. And the automotive manufacturers are not immune to the fact that we project faces on things which sort of look like faces. And that implicitly connotes some fun. And then, of course, when you shut the door, again, if it's got a heavy sound, it connotes premiumness. The smell, all of those things are engineered in. Often in the manufacturing of luxury cars, after they've finished, the psychologists will come in and build sound into the car. Because when you put your foot on the accelerator, consumers want to hear a big, throaty engine. Roar, the roar. Now, that often is engineered in.
Now, we talk about implicit processing, Professor Calvert. What is my brain processing when I walk into, say, a Sephora or a supermarket?
Well, I think Sephora is just one case in
It's
many,
an example.
right? Because, of course, the cosmetic industry is targeting children younger and younger. There's a vested interest to go in and be part of the group with herd mentality kicking in, and you want to be in the in group, and it's fashionable. But it's also extremely multi-sensorially immersive. So there's lots of different colors. And then, of course, the lighting is quite bright. It's deliberately designed to be enticing and uplifting, arousing. So all of these things are happening in and being picked up by your subconscious brain. So what you feel is, I'm going to go in there and buy a lipstick.
Which I already have 10 of.
Well, you may. I need this new color.
Yeah.
But the subconscious brain is picking up all of those other cues. And the next thing you know, you're buying this
You
blusher.
have it in your hand.
And the reason has nothing to do with the fact that you caught a glimpse of a Kardashian wearing this as you walked in. You may just tell me, actually, I didn't have a blusher of this color. I need this. So you will give me a perfectly sound, rational explanation for your choice. Look, she fixated on that for a split second and bought it. And she never saw or is conscious of having seen that advert.
And what happens in a supermarket, though?
Well,
It's not as
similar.
exciting.
It's all a multi-sensory experience. Everybody knows don't go in there when you feel hungry.
Right.
Because when you're hungry, your cognitive resources are depleted, and we're then prone to more system one behavior, impulsive purchasing. And retailers know that. The next thing you find yourself, your left hand pops out and puts something in the basket, and you just pretend to look away. But we've seen some very interesting experiments. For example, in supermarkets in the United States, they played either French music, French accordion music, or German umpapa music overhead in the wine aisle. And when they played the French accordion music, people bought more bottles of French wine, and vice versa if they played the German wine. Interestingly, when they came out of the store and they were stopped by the researchers and asked what they had bought and why, absolutely no one mentioned anything about music or any influence of music on their decision making.
Subconscious.
Yes.
You picked it up. Wow, that's really interesting. You spoke about split-second decision making. You've done extensive research on that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, most of the time we're on autopilot because that's fuel efficient. This is system one, and it's fast, it's efficient, but we don't have access to why it makes the decisions that it does. But largely it's habitual. Now, these two systems, system one,
And system
which
two.
is subconscious and very fast, serendipitously, they operate at different time windows. So if you want to interrogate system one, we would have to show you some images or some words and ask you to respond very, very quickly, say within 500 or 600 milliseconds. And that's the time when system two kicks in and starts processing the information. And I don't want to interrogate system two because you're going to tell me what you think I want to hear.
Right.
And I actually want to know what's in your brain.
So we go to this part about paying, Professor Calvert. In today's day and age, we don't actually take out cash anymore. Like, why does paying cash feel different as to just tapping the card and moving on?
I think that's to do with the temporal relationship between the payment and the reward. Paying cash right here, right now, your brain will assess, is this really worth it? Whereas if I purchase this handbag and I'm just tapping a credit card, I'm not going to get a bill. It doesn't feel like I'm doing that now. I'm going to feel that pain much later on in the month when they send me the bill through, right? But also with the credit card, it's not just when I receive the bill, it's bundled up with lots of other things. It feels like when you get to the reward component, which is actually going on it, there's no downside because the negative component is distant from your experience of the reward. You can fool the brain into lessening the impact of the cost versus the gain that you receive from the product or service that you're buying.
So why do we not apply this way of thinking when it comes to practical things like, say, paying for a hospital bill or going to the dentist.
What is the reward that you're going to get going to the dentist?
Cleaner teeth. I don't know.
And the hospital?
I don't know. So,
It's obviously not a good scenario if you find
right.
yourself
So the brain
usually...
recognizes.
Yeah, this is a double whammy, and you're going to have to pay for it as well.
Professor Calvert, when we look at online platforms, how do these triggers sort of draw us in?
Well, I think nowadays the brands work with neuroscientists and psychologists, and they know very well that personalisation is a big hook for the brain. Do you know the cocktail party phenomenon? When you've got your subconscious brain is constantly monitoring for relevance or threat. And even though you're engaged in a conversation with one party, if you suddenly hear somebody call your name, you'll immediately snap to it.
Yes.
So in the same way, encouraging personalization stops you in your tracks. The algorithms are following you around the internet, and they've been taught to understand what you like and give you more of it. And over time, it becomes more and more and more refined. Now, with biometric measures as well, for example, we can both determine your mood through facial emotion decoding through webcams built into your mobile device or in your laptop. So we can see whether what we show you like, or you're confused about, or you feel angry about, or it's not pleasurable. We can see if we're wearing smart watches or something similar, whether your arousal levels go up. We can literally tailor the personalized images and offers that go to you in such a way that it's going to be very difficult for you to resist.
Right. Now, just to touch on AI a little bit, Professor Calvert, I think a lot of people turn to ChatGPT. How does that sort of influence a person's buying behavior now?
Yeah, I think that's probably going to slow you down. And by when we slow down, we tend to make more rational decisions. But this is just a small time window of system 2 activated shopping, because what's coming next, of course, is what you might have heard of is agentic shopping, and where we're going to have actually your own AI agent go off and do all of that shopping for you. This is double-edged sword. On the one hand, our routine grocery shopping, that's sort of fine. And so the AI agent will be able to take care of all of that stuff. But for a neuroscientist and psychologist, we think in certain circumstances, that's going to take all the joy out of things, because maybe there is such a thing called retail therapy. So I think you're going to find there's a little bit of a backlash, particularly from the luxury brands, where they will negotiate with those AI agents to build in friction. So the AI agent will be buying on your behalf, perhaps, a luxury watch or a luxury bracelet, and it will tease you, and it will give you countdown to when it's coming, so that it plays your dopamine system.
Speaking of that, we talk about this generation, right, where Gen Alpha and the Gen Zs, right? The Gen Alphas have grown up in this attention economy where they've been handed phones and tablets, and they do everything online, right? They don't value probably the concept of going to a retail store and trying on clothing and things like that. So from a neuroscience perspective, how will that change for brands in terms of marketing to this very young generation that is completely immersed in this digital world?
I think the attention economy is a race to the bottom. So brands need to be aware that unless they understand how the brain works and how we put down memories and how we build relationships, they will become obsolete. And the attention window is shortening. We're seeing in the early neuroscience literature that young generational brains are seeing their attentional processes weaken, finding it harder to concentrate. Of course, this is impacting on schoolwork as well as socialization and social scenarios as well. We are really training our brains to expect short form content, but the shorter it gets, the less, unfortunately, our memory systems can actually lay down meaning. Everything is changing so fast. Not only are we outsourcing memory, so for the first time in history, you're seeing that younger generations are less able to do memory tasks as effectively as the older generations. They can't remember many things. So they're getting better at finding where the information is, but not what it is, not the content itself. So that's another problem. In terms of regulating emotions, they're becoming much more short-termist because there's so much expression of dopamine all through the day. You know, every time you get a cue and a like and somebody likes your photo, likes your post. But that comes at a cost because what we've seen is that it makes you more demanding. You can't resist an impulse. You'd rather have a short-term small
Dopamine,
gain than a longer-term win, which is something which is very much a system 2 thing. And that's weakening as well. That will lead on to the fact that we have crafted algorithms that are designed for frictionless interaction. It's been designed like a slot machine to keep you going. And, you know, and then there, of course, there are intermittent small rewards, which plays the dopamine system and keeps you there. We're already seeing that when, both with governments, right, restricting access to social media with children under the age of 16 and so forth. And I think that's in a way that the big tech companies should be held accountable so that we don't mess up our cognitive systems. It's the same thing as the automotive industry in the 70s. The more cars there were, suddenly the more accidents, and governments impressed on the automotive industry that they needed to install seat belts. But I think those safety belts equivalent need to be imposed in the context of these algorithms for the same reason. So it remains to be seen, but I think the brands that will win out will be the ones that help young consumers to navigate this and to be protected from any damaging effects. So I think there's an opportunity for brands to step in and be responsible and win back loyalty where it's been lost.
Right. Do you feel that brands who are not, say, on social media may lose out in the long run?
No, but I think this is a question that came up in a recent seminar that I partook in on agentic shopping. And we've seen the rise again in bookshops and vinyl and farmers markets. So I think there is still a human side which needs to be pandered to. We still need to touch things and to feel things and not just online and digital.
The reason I ask that is because we have all these platforms like TikTok Lives, Instagram Lives, where everyone's going on there to sell people products, and it's a human being selling it to them, and people are purchasing it. But a lot of retail stores in Singapore, like F&B shops, have closed down because people are doing deliveries instead of going to the restaurant to experience that. People are seeking that experience again. So many of them have closed down in
there's a bunch of reasons why. I mean, obviously the cost of all the ingredients have gone up, price of living has gone up. Uncertainty geopolitically means people are being more cautious. I mean, it's a kind of perfect storm of all of these things, which has really impacted, I think, probably not just Singapore, but a lot of F&B globally. So it's difficult to predict.
I would say that after COVID, it kind of changed the way we experience.
Yeah, what we're seeing is in the education sector, there's some feeling that in those 2 years of COVID, the young people who went through that are slightly differently socialized. And that may have a knock-on effect on how they shop, what kind of experiences they have. Maybe it's just a small section of the generation moving through time that we're witnessing some odd behavior.
What do you think is the difference?
Your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for making both impulse, but also in stopping you making impulsive decisions, is still growing into early adulthood. And I think those 2 years where children and young adults were stuck at home, they weren't able to see friends, go out. I think it was really difficult for them.
And whereas for us, we've already experienced that, so we could switch back to our normal behavior, like going out to shop and eat and etc.
I think we certainly noticed that from our first year undergraduates, that they started university at home.
Right.
And they had expecting a freshers week and meeting new people and being able to get away from the family home for a while. And they weren't able to do that. And I think that impacted them quite negatively.
When they came out of it. Now, Professor Calvert, a lot of consumer neuroscience is sort of like, you correct me if I'm wrong, shaped by how the Western behavior is, right? You know, is there a huge difference between how we as Asians function in terms of our behavior?
By and large, the human brain tends to be fairly consistent across cultures in a lot of the things that we do, in decision making and how we perceive objects and so forth. But there are some cross-cultural differences, and these are largely witnessed between East Asian cultures versus Western cultures, which simply because that's where the research has been, comparing East Asians with largely an American set of participants. And they found, for example, in terms of perception, Western people tend to see the trees and not the forest. And the reverse is true in more collectivist cultures. They see the context more than the individual features. With some brain imaging studies, we've seen that when Western people think about themselves, there's a particular brain area that's active, so that's reflective of yourself. When they think of friends or their mother, family members, these are all activated in slightly different adjacent areas. When you do the same experiment in more collectivist cultures, the concept of family and or mother is integrated in the brain areas that are activated with
self.
Yes, perceived sense of self.
Right.
So there's some perceptual differences and there are some semantic differences. And even in small things like emotions from the face. So it tends to be that East Asian cultures understand emotions or receive emotions from the face more from the eye area, whereas the Western cultures are paying more attention to the mouth area. And that's echoed in emoticons, where you'll see that a lot of the expression of the emoticon in Eastern cultures, it's very much the eyes changing, whereas it's very much to do with the mouth changing in the Western cultures. So there's some really kind of neat cross-cultural differences. I think if you're looking at generic phenomena like decision-making, motor movement and all of the sort of basic stuff, it's consistent across most cultures. Yeah.
So in a country like Singapore, where we are quite cosmopolitan and we have all these Western brands, so when brands market to their clients, so which way do they lean more towards, like all these big Western brands that come
I think
any business,
they have quite a time of it, because there's an urge to remain globally relevant whilst trying to incorporate local preferences. So I think the big luxury brands try and stay fairly global, but then if you look at things like McDonald's, they're very, very good at local.
Yes,
they've got the standard Big Macs, and here we have Chicken McSpicy. They cater both for local tastes and they have the global flagship products as well.
Right. And the brain likes that.
It's like, thank you for recognizing that we're different.
Yeah. Before we go, last question, right? So after everything that we've discussed, the brain goes through a lot of processing, right? At the end of the day, the question is, does all of this awareness actually sort of help consumers make better decisions, or will the brain always just find a different way to, go past these triggers? And
I think that really comes down to the individual. Now that you know that these tricks exist, you might think first before making an impulsive decision. I'm just as susceptible as the next person. I'll tend to walk into a pharmacist and ask for Nurofen, where unless I'm thinking quickly, I should go for ibuprofen. It's exactly the same product.
Thing, yeah.
The only difference is one is branded and the other is not. It's physically, pharmacologically exactly the same. But, if I'm in a rush, I'll just pick the thing that I know that's most familiar. If I can slow down and I'm not in a hurry, I will ask the pharmacist, do you have any ibuprofen, just basic ibuprofen? I don't need Nurofen, the brand.
Right.
And I don't notice things like the music or the lighting, the influence influence me. I
Right.
just go about my everyday sort of shopping experience. You can be aware of it, but whether or not you act on it and change your shopping habits and maybe just think twice before pressing the buy button, I think that's an individual decision.
To make. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Calvert. I think it was a very enriching conversation for us.
Thank you for the invitation.
If this conversation gave you something to think about, don't stop here. Every episode on Open House is a chance to see the why behind success, resilience, and growth. Click on the video on your screen. This is the one you're meant to see next.